We're going to install a new door into an old door lining. So we need to get some measurements of this old door lining, figure out if we need to trim the door or if it's going to go straight in, and then we need to mortar some hinges in the door and try and line up the old mortised hinge holes with the new door.
To check the width of the door, I'll take 3 measurements, one at the top, the middle and the bottom. To check the finish height of the door, I'll take a measurement on the right and left of the door opening. To measure the original hinge positions, I push my tape to the top of the door lining and measure down to the top of each hinge mortise. I need these measurements to transfer onto the door blank. When I mark the measurements onto the door blank, I remove up to 3 mm from each side of the door opening. This is to ensure the door doesn't bind. In this case, the door will fit straight in with no trimming. If you need to trim your door, watch my trimming door video.
To figure out the orientation of the door in relation to the opening that's there, the way we do it is we get the door up, the small head goes at the top, the large footer goes at the bottom. So what we do is we put ourselves inside the room when we're working out where the hinges go. So I'm inside the room that I'm working on, and the hinges are on the inside of the door here because it's swinging closed, latching that side.
In this case, the door is opening towards my left shoulder, so the hinges will be on the closest edge to my right shoulder. To mark the position of the hinges, I put my tape from the top of the door and mark the top of each hinge. For this door, I'm marking up new positions on the door to correspond with the old hinge positions in the door lining. Mark the position of the hinges onto the door and take off a few millimeters to allow for a gap at the top of the door. The top of the hinge position in the door lining might be 152 millimeters, and therefore I mark 150 millimeters onto the door.
So I use the skeleton hinge jig. This allows me to route out perfect hinges very quickly with consistency every time.
Line up the 2 red arrows when assembling, ensuring the metal coupler slots in. Fasten together using the tightening screw.
On the top of the hinge jig there's this metal plate that basically sits on the top of the door if you're doing new doors in new linings. There's 2 tiny little lines on one side of the jig, and on the very inside line that's where you put the hinge to line it up, and then that tells you the size of the hinge. And you adjust the size of the opening here, you're routing based on these stops. This is the router I use. It's a DeWalt 1/4 inch router, and I use the 16mm guide bush on the bottom with a 12mm trend straight shank router bit.
There is a line on the bit shaft which needs to be tightened below the bush for safety.
And you just set the depth by plunging it with the jig, and I put a hinge in between the bar and the base stop plate on the router. So then I plunge it down that extra distance to allow for the hinge, and then I can route inside the skeleton hinge jig.
Once you have cut out the hinge positions with a router, you'll be left with rounded corners. Use a corner chisel to square those off. It's a good idea to pre-drill where your screws are going to get a central position and to assist the screw going in without snapping the screw heads off. As with any pre-drilling, you want to use a drill bit equal or slightly less than the bore of the screw. This allows the thread of the screw to cut into the timber. Once the hinges are installed, I use air pump bags to raise the door to the correct height. This is easier when you're installing the door by yourself. You can then fix the hinges into the door lining using the original holes if lining up correctly, or by pre-drilling where needed. I use the screws supplied to fix the hinges into the door lining. Do the same for the middle and bottom hinges. You can now test the operation of the door. Next, watch my how to install a door handle video.